Shoot, dodge, and control gravity itself in Robonauts. Will jumping between spheres bring you closer to your peers?
With vaguely spherical structures that combine naturalistic and artificially smooth surfaces, the visual style of Robonauts is sufficiently sci-fi. The 2.5D graphics and the bright, colorful environments floating over the dark backgrounds of space solidify the game's futuristic look. There's a decent variety of interesting-looking alien enemies, and combat often looks really cool as you watch bullets fly in directions you didn't expect, or use the arc of a grenade to your advantage to hit an enemy on an adjacent asteroid. As enemies fill the screen or crawl all over the surface of a smaller structure, it can get a bit hectic and confusing. Switching your gravity to jump between structures is often disorienting or dizzying, as the screen quickly spins 180 degrees. But overall, the visual style is one thing the game excels in.
Robonauts is a side-scrolling shooter with an emphasis on gravity mechanics. Generally, you're moving around a small, circular structure, and are able to hop to other nearby structures to be affected by their gravity instead. It can be disorienting to watch the screen spin around, and confusing to navigate the environment as a whole, but the controls and movement are very simple and intuitive. The objective of each level might vary slightly, but it usually involves destroying all the marked enemies in an area, and then finding the exit portal. Opening the map pauses the game, gives you a zoomed-out view of the entire area, and highlights where the objectives are. The gameplay rarely deviates from this simple setup, and as a result, it quickly becomes repetitive. But the game is also very short, sacrificing longevity and variety to ensure it doesn't overstay its welcome. Much like the size of the environments, many of Robonauts' mechanics feel limited. Platforming is a bit of a trial and error exercise, as jumping feels oddly weak, like you're not getting the height that you would expect. Shooting often requires you to get dangerously close to enemies, as the default weapon has almost no range. Thankfully, this is alleviated by frequent pickups of more interesting and more effective weapons with increased range or power, but limited ammo. You also don't have much control over where you're shooting, as your robot character will automatically target the nearest enemy, whether or not it's the one you want to hit. When you're not surrounded by enemies on your asteroid, it can be fun to strategically attack enemies on a nearby asteroid by jumping up to let your bullets reach them.
The game is made longer artificially by ramping up the difficulty around the halfway point. The gameplay doesn't change, but later levels will throw more and deadlier enemies at you. Enemy nests act as spawn points that you need to destroy, but these are redundant as the level itself will spawn new enemies and new nests when it feels like it. The game can get quite difficult thanks to the amount of enemies and the limited range of your weapons. Because you have to get so close to attack, some enemies are very difficult to kill without sacrificing large chunks of your own health. Health pickups are living creatures that actively move away from you, so it can be tedious to heal yourself. If you die, you'll have to start the level over again. Levels typically took 2 to 6 minutes to complete, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the difficulty and repetitive nature of the gameplay made restarting a level very frustrating. As cool as the movement mechanics of hopping between asteroids seems, nothing is ever done to make it more useful or interesting. It's simply a way to navigate the small map in each level. One level introduces puzzle elements that turn the asteroids into mini-mazes, with lasers blocking your progress. It's the most interesting use of the movement mechanics emphasized by the game's design, but it isn't present at all beyond the single short level. We welcome the change of pace, and it's a shame there wasn't more gameplay like it, as almost every other level boiled down to the same hectic shooting and dodging.
Robonauts single-player and co-op modes are separate campaigns, but they are pretty much identical, except for the lack of tutorial in co-op. Co-op features a vertical split screen with neither player prioritized. The split screen does look particularly zoomed out, so everything is smaller and harder to see in co-op. Either player can pull up the tactical view, which covers the entire screen and pauses the action for both players. Both players have the same abilities and can act independently, even splitting the work of completing objectives if they choose.
Keeping some distance can be helpful in reducing the on-screen chaos, but it's not a good idea to get too far apart from each other, as any player dying ends the mission in failure. You're able to retrieve a fallen teammate within a time limit simply by standing where they fell, but it can be tricky to find them if there are several asteroids away or surrounded by enemies. At least one mission requires the players to split up without being able to reach each other to revive. Since this mission included instant death traps, it was made more frustrating in co-op. Overall, it's hard to determine whether co-op makes the game easier or harder. Yes, you can split responsibilities or take out enemies together, but failing a mission if either player dies means it's not always possible for one player to pick up slack if necessary. Once the exit gate is open, either player can activate it to end the level, making that last race to the exit potentially easier in co-op. The short levels do make the game good for short sessions, as each attempt will likely take you only a few minutes.
Beyond the campaign, there's a small selection of versus modes where players compete for high scores. It works fine, and at least has the benefit that dying doesn't force you to restart. If you enjoy the shooting mechanics, it can offer a bit more replayability, but it wasn't interesting or varied enough to keep us coming back to it. The story of Robonauts feels like a callback to the simple stories of browser-based Flash games, both in its content and the style of storytelling. Every level makes a bit of progress in telling a short, simple story through the subtitles of a couple of NPCs that give some flavor to the level objectives. It's a decent glue to connect the levels, but it's by no means a reason to play the game.
As good as it looks, Robonauts just doesn't feel that fun to play. We enjoyed it just enough to finish the very short campaign, and even that was stretching the limits of our patience. We would have welcomed more levels that emphasized mechanics other than combat to take advantage of the more interesting gravity gimmick. We didn't regret our time with it, but ultimately it left us feeling pretty meh. Outside of a keen interest in this style of game, this is one we would not recommend.